Time for another edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling. Thank you so much for watching. Of all the things you could be watching on YouTube, you're watching me, at least right now, so I hope this is a good one. I really appreciate everybody watching the episodes. Today, March 26th, is the birth date of one of the most legendary frontmen in rock and roll, Steven Tyler. I will be honest with you, I have no interest whatsoever in his country solo career, but I have an interest in Aerosmith. Yeah, later on it gets a little dicey, but we'll get into all of that. I'm going to go through my Aerosmith CD collection, even going to touch on what I do have of solo projects of various members of the group. So I'll get started. A lot of these are original U.S. issues on Columbia. There was a massive reissue campaign in 1993 that Sony did. A couple of those come from that, but most of these are just whatever was available when I started replacing my cassettes with CDs in the early 90s. Here's the first one. This uses the, I guess, the mid-70s reissue cover. Different logo than originally, and it says featuring Dream On. Other than that, it's the same. Pretty bland back cover. On one hand, you know, some of these early issues are, you know, kind of boring. But on the other hand, it's kind of neat because they are very, very early. And that's what's inside the first Aerosmith CD, at least this version that I have. Next up, this is a great, great album. I have a lot of followers on Instagram, and I follow a lot of people over there. It's just daily postings and stuff. I try to stick with one post a day, and I see this one pop up a lot. Love this album. The second Aerosmith album, Get Your Wings, from 1974, and this, of course, is an original Columbia Records CD. The CD itself, I won't show every one of these. The CD itself is just the usual Columbia one that they used at the time. This has a primitive version of the Wings logo. And minimal credits, but yet, when I'm upgrading from CDs to cassettes, in the early 90s, as I was, still more than the cassette had in it, which was nothing. Coming up next, of course, is Toys in the Attic, the first really big Aerosmith album. Original U.S. issue on Columbia. And not much else in it for credits. I think that was all on the back cover of the record. When I started buying CDs in late 90, early 91, the first Aerosmith one that I bought was this one, Rocks, from 76, another classic album, and usual CBS CD. Once again, we just have these single little fold-out things, so there's not much in here, no lyrics or anything. So I mentioned earlier in '93, Sony Music did a reissue campaign of Aerosmith. And one that I ended up getting, it wasn't until '94. I didn't see this on CD a lot, so I ended up getting the reissued version of Draw the Line. So it's got this hype sticker on it, America's Greatest Rock and Roll Band. That same sticker, I think, appeared on all of these. So this is the U.S. edition. You can see on the side here, it looks quite different. The cassettes look like this too. Back cover has a little more gone into it. The CD looks different. And the booklet has a lot of stuff in here, actually. Big fold out. It's got memorabilia, singles, press clippings, advertisements, different things related to the period surrounding the release of Draw the Line. Continues over here, including some chart showings of where the album was at. And the next one up is Live Bootleg. Now, this album, as big as Aerosmith were, not until the '93 reissue campaign was it available on CD in North America. It had to be an import, and I didn't get around to getting it, so I picked it up when the reissue campaign came out. And this is the first one that's actually a Canadian issue. So this is a Canadian issue of Live Bootleg. So reprinting some of the things that were on the record, like the coffee stains. One of the cool things I liked about Live Bootlegs, all of the pictures that were inside the record, and they're all reprinted here. Unlike Draw the Line, I don't think there's much for There's not much for press clippings. It's basically, there was a lot inside the record to reissue, so they just kind of reprinted it there. Those are actually the only two of the CDs I have from that reissue campaign. The rest are originals. One of my favorite Aerosmith albums ever, Night in the Ruts, here from '79. Dark Horse album for sure, sort of the equivalent of Van Halen's Fair Warning, but I just love it. Not much in here. No, not much in here at all. Just pictures and the credits that were inside the record. Great place to start, but back in the original, well, pre-internet. Great primer for early Aerosmith, pre-Permanent Vacation, remains this greatest hits from 1980, and this was an early CD I bought of theirs too. I didn't have too many. Just a US edition, and there was nothing much inside of it in the first place. It's just a sort of an inverse of the logo, which works. Next one, I bought this one used. It's not one that you see all the time. Rockin' a Hard Place. This is still a US Columbia issue. Little tiny bit more inside of it for credits, because there was a little tiny bit more inside the record. But not much, just what you see here. So, of course, while Aerosmith did Rockin' a Hard Place, Joe Perry and Brad Whitford were out of the band. And Joe Perry did 3 solo albums as this Joe Perry project in between his departure from Aerosmith, and then Brad Whitford did a solo, well, not a solo project, sort of a band joining with Derek St. Holmes, who sang for Ted Nugent. They did 1 album. So I'll do those in sort of the chronological order, even though I skipped ahead with Rockin' a Hard Place. But this is sort of highlighting the solo stuff. First Joe Perry solo album, Let the Music Do the Talking, came out in 1980. This is a Columbia CD. You can see here they just say Joe Perry, doesn't say Joe Perry Project. Doesn't look like there's room, but the next album they do something different. I'll show you what that is. Back cover, same as the back cover of the record. These CDs you didn't see all that often, so I was glad to get these converted over. This actually has credits and all the lyrics inside of it, which is quite unlike the Aerosmith CDs at the time. These might have been issued slightly later on CD. The second Joe Perry Project album was also on Columbia. I've got the Rock and Rolls Again. So they see they used a smaller font here, so they were able to get the full thing. It's such a long title and kind of a long group name too. There on the back. Band photo and a little bit of credits. So the Whitford St. Holmes album came out in 1981. Did not do very well. Like the Joe Perry album, the first one did okay. The second one, not so much. Third one, not so much. But the Whitford St. Holmes album especially just disappeared. And it wasn't until the Aerosmith reissue campaign in '93 till it was available on CD and available on anything readily. Again, I don't actually have it on record or anything else. So it wasn't until '96 that I found this Whitford St. Holmes album. And it's okay. Sharpshooter's a really good song. Whiskey Woman's pretty good. It's interesting. It's not as... it's just kind of run-of-the-mill early 80s hard rock. There's nothing really distinctive about it. I mean, Derek St. Holmes is a good singer. It's interesting to hear a chance to hear what Brad Whitford does completely on his own without Joe Perry. He's kind of the overlooked guy in Aerosmith because, of course, Joe Perry gets a lot of attention, but I mean, Brad's just, you know, every bit as important. He's just more behind the scenes. Picture of the group. And for the record, the group was filled out by a bass player named Dave Hewitt and a drummer named Steve Pace. Now, the only time I know either of those names anything from anywhere else is that Steve Pace, curiously, after that would join the band Crocus, so much heavier. One more Joe Perry Project album while Aerosmith are kind of in their wilderness years. 1983, Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker. I don't have this one on record. This is the first Joe Perry Project album I saw, ever heard tell of. came out in 1983 on MCA and was promptly buried by the label. What I'm holding here is something that was reissued in the early 90s. Of course, Aerosmith were big business again, so MCA put this one out. Of course, MCA by then was also distributing Aerosmith's label, Geffen, so it made sense. This is a Columbia House issue. When I saw it come up in Columbia House, I was pretty excited to get a copy of it on CD. Interesting stuff. You know, the Joe Perry Project albums all have, you know, songs that could have made good Aerosmith songs, like Let the Music Do the Talking, for example. This third one's really, really out there, although there is some fun stuff on here. He had a completely different band on this one, and probably doesn't remember much about this whole period. So, of course, 1984, it's a reuniting of the original band, or the original recording band anyway. They signed with Geffen Records, and they put out an underrated album, Done with Mirrors. Now, this one actually has... See that? Now, I'm filming it. You won't see this, but I'm filming it, and I can actually read it. Isn't that funny? Same thing here. Everything but the serial numbers backwards on this. They did actually put out a CD later on into the 90s where everything read the right way, but it was a gimmick they were trying. It is a really good album despite all of that, and it doesn't have a good reputation because they were still, they still weren't in great shape, but it was the start of their comeback, kind of very quietly. Nothing different in here that was from the record, although the cassette and the CD have the song Darkness on there, which the album, the vinyl, did not have. So, of course, as I discussed in the cassette episode, like what record labels will do if an artist changes labels, then they'll try to cash in on a new success, if there is any. And with Aerosmith, I think Columbia had a feeling there might be. So in 1986, they reissued Classics Live. This was an 8-song collection of, it's actually 9, one of them was a medley. These were various songs from 77 to 83. So some of these feature the classic lineup, some of them feature the Rick Dufay, Jimmy Crespo lineup. Slightly newer issue of the CD, you'll see it doesn't say CBS on it. It says just simply Columbia. It doesn't have the Columbia logo. This has some pictures and things inside of it. Like that there, and also this is a live collage. Like I said, pictures of all the band members. The next year they did it again. This one I think is a little bit slightly better for a few reasons. Classics Live 2, the Aerosmith logo's in gold on this one, and this is just a US CBS disc. Some of these songs were recorded in the late 70s, but some of them were recorded on the Back in the Saddle tour, which is the tour they did in '84, again back with the original lineup, including Let the Music Do the Talking, which is a song that Joe Perry did on his own with the project, and they re-recorded for Done with Mirrors, so it became part of the Aerosmith catalog. So some slightly newer looking pictures of the band here, especially these ones here. Those almost look like Permanent Vacation era photos. I'm not sure if Classics Live came out first or Permanent Vacation did. I've always considered this one to be the first one because it's the older material. Speaking of Permanent Vacation, here it is. This CD is a US Columbia House version on Geffen. It's an older one. It's got Warner Brothers distribution on it, not MCA. That happened in the early 90s. And, I mean, there's not much, you know, nothing really rare about this. This was a big album and brought them back. So it's got, you know, what you'd expect this album to have. It's got all of the artwork that was in the cassette or the CD, and yeah, it's Permanent Vacation. I bought this one used, so it's one of those ones that someone put in and they didn't put the tabs in the right spot, or they put the booklet over the tabs. It's a big pet peeve of mine. It goes under the tabs, not over, because then when you close it, anyway. 1988, once again, CBS, once Permanent Vacation became huge, and Aerosmith was sort of back, you know, a major headliner, major force in music again. This is sort of a compilation to the greatest hits from 1980. This is Gems, came out late 1988 on Columbia. Great collection, great follow-up collection to the first greatest hits. Gives you a real good overview of basically the first segment of their career. This is an old Canadian CD that used this ugly, well, I say it's ugly, it's very nondescript looking box format. And I've talked about this before. I've got Cheap Trick discs that look like this, and Journey. I kind of like it now. I didn't like it at the time, because what the US disc would have done is use this for the back cover of the CD, which is also the back cover of the booklet, but they didn't. and very minimal here. Credits. Next up, the even bigger album than Permanent Vacation. Pump. Yeah, you've seen this one before. 1989 on Geffen Records. And this is a Canadian edition of Pump on Geffen, with still with Warner distribution, not with MCA. Now, what I always found strange about this, when it was first big, I had it on cassette, and I thought that maybe the CD had more songs on it, because there are actually there's 10 songs on the album, but this thing lists 15. But if you look, they have funny titles like 9.2, or not titles, but song numbers. And they have things like Dulcimer Stomp and Hoodoo and Water Song. These are all links between the songs that most of the time they were just considered part of whatever the next song was. And Water Song was basically the intro to JD's Got a Gun, for instance. But they gave them song titles on here, which is kind of funny. Typical Aerosmith humor. Picture the band and the stuff that was on the inside of the cassette that most people probably would have bought this on cassette when it first came out, and a photo of the group. So the next thing was sort of, Columbia had been putting this, they put those Classics Live albums out, they put Gems out, and in 1991 they put out what would be the very first box set that I ever bought. It's the first time a band I liked put out a box set, and it's a good one. 1991, Pandoras Box on Columbia Records CDs. Also came out on cassette. It's also been reissued and reconfigured, like a smaller version, but I got the big old box version. This is exciting. There was a lot of unreleased material on here. This is where I first became aware that there was a Whitford St. Holmes album, that Brad did anything while he was away. 3 discs of material, including some very old material from 1966 with Steven Tyler's first group, Chain Reaction, or his first recording group anyway. Very different, very psychedelic sounding. Lengthy booklet that appears in this with all kinds of information about each of the songs. Like, I learned so much about Aerosmith and the history of the band from reading this. It was really, really well done. It was worth putting together. This is all the Columbia releases at the time that they put in here. Of course, none of the Geffen ones. And I'll show you what each of the discs look like. They were each slightly different colored, but they had this for front cover of the disc. And was green, blue, and purple. Each of the discs were for Pandora's Box. Worth picking up. Now, in 2004, they put out something called Box of Fire, and Matt has that, and maybe, we'll do a box set episode or something. He'll show that off, because that's very cool. What that is a huge box. Literally, it's probably about, I don't know, it's big. It's big enough to hold all of the Aerosmith CDs on Sony at the time, and they all form on the sides, and they all form a logo. But there's a bonus disc with it that contains a couple songs that actually to this day I don't have. There's an instrumental called Subway, and their Lesson Zero soundtrack in 1987 featured Aerosmith covering Johnny Rivers' tune, the Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu. It's actually quite good, and it's never appeared on any of their other albums. They have a few stray songs that have appeared as B-sides and soundtrack songs. We'll discuss that a little bit more in a little bit. 1993, Get a Grip. This was actually the first Aerosmith studio album I bought brand new, or it hadn't been out very long. And this is pretty popular. I mean, if you're still watching this, you've probably seen what's inside if you're a fan. All the weird graphics that are inside here, band photos, lyrics. There's actually a limited edition version of this that came out that sometimes I wish I'd have bought. It actually had fur on. It felt like it had fur on the cover, but I didn't. 1994, there was a compilation called Big Ones, and this has all of the Geffen hits, I guess, and a couple of new songs. No big mysteries here. Showed this off of the cassette version as well. That's what the disc itself looks like. Very gaudy, sort of colorful graphics they used in here. I don't know how much of this the band had input on, to be honest with you. Probably very little. It was a record company issue, and it did very well for them. Sold a lot of copies. So there's a bit of a gap between studio albums for various reasons, and in early 1997, 9 Lives finally came out. But the first thing that came out, this is actually one of very, very few CD singles I've held on to. They became like cassette singles. They became kind of pointless to me. But I still have this one. This was the first single from Nine Lives, Falling in Love is Hard on the Knees. So it has that whole Siamese artwork, Siamese cat artwork that was prevalent throughout that album. And this has a B-side on it called Fall Together, which didn't make the album, which is not a bad song. That's got the original Nine Lives artwork on there too, if you can see that. And this is what the CD itself looked like. So I managed to hold on to that one. Then Nine Lives came out, and I bought it when it first came out, so I bought it with the unchanged artwork. If you want to see what the other artwork looks like, well, you can Google it, or on my cassette episode, my cassette of this has the reissued artwork. It was considered to be offensive in some countries, so that's what the back cover looks like. This has one of those ones, you might not see what that says there, but if I turn it like this, it actually says Nine Lives. You kind of have to look at it like this, and then over here, turn it like that, it says Live for 10. That's the lyric of the title song, Nine Lives, Live for 10. Thick booklet inside this one, and it's got a lot of weird stuff with this. Actually, there was a interactive like CD-ROM game on this disc, which I don't think that segment of this CD ever worked. It's put out by CD Extra, which included this little insert with it, which is kind of a period piece for the, you don't see it anymore. Right around the same time that Nine Lives came out, Sony put out a little EP, which I talked about in the cassette video, which is called Made in America. And I don't normally buy these things, but this had really cool packaging, and I just thought it was cheap. I thought, yeah, that's kind of neat. It's got Chip Away the Stone on it, which you can't go wrong with that song. It's one of my all-time favorites. And it's got a live version of One Way Street from the first album that was recorded in '94. That was actually the main selling point, I guess. It never appeared anywhere else. So 1998, I almost forgot to dig this one out, but it kind of fits into their catalog. I have very, very few soundtracks. I tend to buy albums by one artist, but every once in a while there'll be a soundtrack if I see it cheap enough and it's got 2 or 3 songs on it that make it worth getting. I pick it up, and that is the case with the Armageddon soundtrack. Now, Aerosmith had a very, very big hit single off this, which if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything, so I'm not going to say anything. I will say this. There are some things on here worth getting, but there's actually, altogether, there's 4 Aerosmith songs on here. They have, for whatever reason, Sweet Emotion, which is the '91 remix. It's got the really heavy drums in it, which I actually didn't have on anything since I got rid of the cassette single many years ago. So that's good to have on an album. Their version of the Beatles' Come Together is on here. The aforementioned big hit song, and another song that never appeared anywhere else, probably had 9 Lives left over, called What Kind of Love Are You On, which isn't a bad song at all. So just a real quick mention about that. And also in '98, now by this time Aerosmith had gone back to Columbia, so now Geffen, it was their turn to start issuing things. So they issued this live album called A Little South of Sanity. And this is recorded, I think, partially on the Get a Grip tour, partially on the Nine Lives tour. And it's a good set list. There's a good selection of songs. Sort of typical wacky Aerosmith humor on here. Oh yeah. I don't know why the whole gas station thing. But, some pictures here on the back, and there are, I don't know, I don't know if these are actual ads that ran or exactly what the story is, but well, it looks like inside of like an Enquirer or something like that, or a tabloid magazine, and there's like, advertisements for some of their albums on here, and the typical thanks. It's just written on a strange, not strange fonts too, but different size fonts. Kind of hard to read. This isn't an Aerosmith album, but I'm going to include it here anyway. This is a tribute album that came out in 1999 called Not the Same Old Song and Dance. And this has, different artists on here. Vince Neil's on here, Jack Blades, Ronnie James Dio, Jeff Keith, Jack Russell, J.D. Lane, Stephen Pearcy, various like 80s bands doing Aerosmith songs. Some of these are actually really good. I'm not much of a Slaughter fan, but Mark Slaughter singing Back in the Saddle is really cool. Jack Blades and Tommy Shaw, of course, have written with Aerosmith, and they team up on Sweet Emotion, which almost makes it a Damn Yankees reunion, but it isn't. And Ted Nugent appears elsewhere doing Ragdoll. Well, that's all right. And there's some good stuff in it. Jeff Keith singing Draw the Line. I mean, that's good stuff. So, yeah, it's a curio. It's not an Arrow, it's part of their catalog, but I include it here. Then, I'll be honest with you, it kind of starts to go downhill for me. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of new Aerosmith released, but like a good fan, I've been picking it up. In 2001, they put up this album, Just Push Play. For the most part, I say, just don't bother. Some of you out there might like this album. There are a couple decent songs on here. I mean, Jaded was a good enough pop song, I suppose, and the title song's okay. But I think even Joe Perry looks back on this album, doesn't think it was all that great. So I'm hardly alone there, but I did buy it. It sold decently. This was 2001. I think this came out right around the time that they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was completely, totally deserved. Graphics look very, very 90s, very late 90s, early 2000s. So that's Just Push Play. This is just the standard Canadian edition. There's other editions that had extra songs on them, but it was quite enough. The thing I was more excited about that came out in late 2001 was another Geffen anthology, because that was Just Push Play was on their Columbia album contract. So this is Young Lust, the Aerosmith anthology, and this is what Big Ones should have been. I understand they wanted to sell that as a single disc and strike while the iron was hot. This collects their complete Geffen catalog together, including it's got some things on here that make this worthwhile for especially for the Aerosmith even now that sort of maybe they're not so much into the band anymore, but it's got just things like Ain't Enough, which was outtake, well, not an outtake, it was recorded for Pump. And if you've never heard the song before and you're familiar with the Pump album, if you think of the song Don't Get Mad, Get Even, how it fades out, this song Ain't Enough starts with it fading back in, and then it changes tempo, for instance. This is the first time that an Aerosmith album contained the Run DMC version of Walk This Way, which was the song that brought their career back to life. It's got things like their cover of The Doors' Love Me Two Times, which appeared in the Doors tribute album, Head First, which is a B-side of the song Blind Man. It's collecting a bunch of the songs, but not all of the songs that were sort of stray Aerosmith songs that kind of missed the mark. So it's a double CD set. Band picture there. Liner notes by Jerry Miller. If you grew up like me reading Metal Edge, Jerry Miller was their main writer, and she provides the liner notes for this anthology. Now, I think that what you will see now in Walmart or wherever that says Aerosmith Gold, it's a double set, is actually a repackaged version of this. 3 years later, another Aerosmith release, and I was actually kind of excited about this one. 2004, they put a blues album out called Honkin On Bobo, and this is a deluxe edition that came in this little box here. There's a physical CD in this, but this is almost like a shortened version of a long box. It's a little short, but came with a harmonica, a little harmonica keychain, and we'll open this up and get to what's actually inside of here. So that's the harmonica keychain. This thing does not want to open for me. Okay. This is a Canadian edition. Here's what the disc itself looks like. I like this better than Just Push Play, but it's not something I listen to all that much now. Sort of interesting that my least favorite song on it was the one original song that they did on here. It was kind of just a period where they were entering into a sort of a lull. They were doing really well as a touring act, but I don't think internally they were getting along, and they certainly weren't very prolific. They weren't putting out a lot of music, especially if you compare it to someone like, a contemporary. There's Alice Cooper, who by the year, the 2000s, he was rolling putting out albums. Maybe it's easier when it's one person calling the shots. I don't know. The next thing to come out from Aerosmith was a live album Columbia put out in 2005. They recorded it at the Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas. It was called Rockin' the Joint, and just a single disc live album. They do dig into some of their deeper catalog, like No More, No More is on there, Seasons of Wither, big 10-inch record, Draw the Line, Rattlesnake Shake. So it's kind of cool that they did that, getting in some of their earlier tracks. And your typical live shots, credits inside of here. Still no new music, lots of talk about it. 2006, they put up this very best of Aerosmith called Devil's Got a New Disguise. It's kind of like a trick photography thing going on, like Alice Cooper did on Dada, Def Leppard did on Retroactive. This is a single disc that had 2 new songs on it, Sedona Sunrise and the title song, Devil's Got a New Disguise. The rest of it is, well, it's essentially a hits collection. I suppose for a single disc Aerosmith collection, it's still probably the best, although it's missing a few. And so it was a long gap. 2012, the release of the next Aerosmith album finally happened. Music from Another Dimension. I like this artwork. Got this on vinyl too. This is the regular edition, which has 15 songs on it. This album contains songs by everybody in the band, pretty much. Even Tom Hamilton takes a lead vocal. And came out in various forms. A lot of band photos inside here. There's actually a few good songs on here. A lot of good songs in here. It's kind of too long an album, though. There's a lot of filler. And, like I said, several deluxe editions. The one I bought at Canadian Walmart, came in this book thing, came with a DVD on the making of the album with a few live videos. And bonus track, there's a disc on here that's got the 3 bonus tracks on it. But there's actually 4, there's more songs than that on the, I think, the Japanese version, which I'd like to somehow get a hold of. I don't know how exactly to do that, but some cool graphics inside here. This is the booklet inside the deluxe edition, and this poster, which is actually drawn by Slash, who's obviously a huge Aerosmith fan. See if I can do this without damaging it. Yeah, just a drawing of the band, pretty cool. And so far, that's been the last new Aerosmith release, but that's just a look through my Aerosmith CD collection. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your feedback, appreciate you tuning in to watch these videos. That's it for another edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We're coming up now on less than a week from Record Store Day 2017, and there will be a Record Store Day 2017 video for Tim's Vinyl Confessions. So we'll see you then.